Okay. Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Rachel Paul with IAAP. We're happy to have you here today for our final session in our 2021 Higher Education Series. Before we get started, just a few items to go over. Closed captioning is provided. You can select the closed captioning icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will record today's session as the previous sessions and make those available to all registrants afterwards. Attendee mics are muted to prevent any background noise or disruptions. And we encourage you to leave questions in the Q&A as we go along, and we'll take some time for those. And I will be monitoring the chat for any general dialogue or any technical issues. So again, thank you for joining us, and I welcome James Thurston to kick off our program today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel. I am James. I'm a Vice President at G3ICT, and I'm joined today by Megan Lawrence, who's an accessibility evangelist at Microsoft, and Damian Sian, who's currently serving as the Director of Web Accessibility at Prudential, but who's also previously served as the Senior Web Accessibility Advisor at Princeton University. Megan and Damian, do you want to say just a quick hello?
Hello, it's so great to be here this morning. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, I'm also very happy to be here, and it's been a really exciting and fun journey to be a part of these events in the past.
Fantastic. Thanks both, and I'm thrilled to have you here. I've been looking forward to this for a while. So our goal with this session, this final session as part of the webinar series, is to share some detail about steps that universities can take to be more accessible and really more inclusive. We call these steps quick wins because they're meant to be relatively easy for a university to take, but ideally can generate some significant accessibility and inclusion impact or progress at the university. So these quick wins that we'll be discussing are based on our experience working with universities together, the three of us, but also separately and with other organizations as well. And as I mentioned, I've really been looking forward to chatting with you, Megan and Damian, because I've seen how you work with universities, with their senior leaders, with their managers, with their faculty, staff, and students, and really work with them to help understand the benefits of expanding accessibility and digital inclusion, and then really suggesting specific actionable steps they can take to grow their commitment to accessibility and digital inclusion and to really make it more real at the university, in the university setting. So I know that your experience and insights, they've helped numerous universities. I've seen it firsthand when we've worked together in other organizations also. So we're really thrilled to have you both here to pick your brains and hear from that experience. Before we start to share the great wealth of knowledge from Damian and Megan with this wider audience, I want to give just a little bit of context about the tool and the engagements that kind of brought the three of us together on several occasions to work with universities. And by extension, that helped us to sort of uncover and share some of these quick wins that we'll be discussing today. So the Smart University Digital Inclusion Maturity Model is an assessment tool that G3ICT has developed and uses with partners like Megan and Damian to help universities better understand how their digital transformation, that is how their use of technology and data, is either supporting accessibility and inclusion of people with disabilities, faculty, staff, and students, or potentially actually creating additional barriers to that inclusion and accessibility. So the maturity model assessment tool is made up of 28 different variables. We call them enablers because they actually enable accessibility and inclusion. And they really help to define what it means for a university to be both smart, to be using technology and data, but also inclusive at the same time. And these variables or enablers contribute to the university's building a set of capabilities, the capabilities that support greater inclusion and accessibility. And we've defined 18 different capabilities that we use with universities in working with them to think about their approach to accessibility and inclusion as they're using technology. So in the tool and in the engagements, the conversations that we have with universities, we look at things like the role of leadership, the existence or not existence of a digital inclusion strategy and how that relates to the university's IT strategy. We look at the university's engagement tools in its culture of diversity, culture of innovation, and how that supports accessibility and inclusion. And we look at things like procurement and other processes that the university has, and really how all of these together, these capabilities are supporting ideally greater inclusion of faculty, staff, and students at the university. Of course, we also dig deeply into technology and data, which are really the backbone and the lifeblood of smart cities, smart universities, of digital transformation. And the way that we've been using this tool, including on several occasions with Megan and Damian, is that we work with the university to provide us with some documents. We review those documents to do a sort of initial assessment. That includes budgets that cover accessibility. It could be IT strategies, organizational charts, accessibility policies, the kinds of documents that a university would have handy. It's not new research to create these. Sometimes the universities do an online self-assessment by their staff and perhaps their students about how they think they're doing on these variables. And then we curate a team of experts like Megan and Damian to work with leaders at the university to understand their approach under the framework of this maturity model and these 18 capabilities. The result is always a roadmap that gives a set of scores for each of the variables, and then more importantly, I think a set of recommendations and priorities for moving forward, and always numerous what we call quick wins. These relatively easy things that universities can be doing make up a part of the roadmap, and that's where really we're going to be focusing our discussion today. So with that, Megan and Damian, let's jump in. I think I'd like to start with this pillar in the maturity model called strategic intent, and there we're looking at things like the university's digital inclusion strategy, its leadership role, its budget and funding for accessibility, and the existence, ideally, of a business case, a value proposition for a commitment to accessibility and digital inclusion. So, Damian, in the work that we've done with universities and your work at universities, we really try to explore how a school or university moves beyond just to focus on legal compliance and risk avoidance, which are important, but really to building a real business case commitment to accessibility and inclusion as part of its technology assets and deployment. Can you talk maybe a little bit about a quick win step or steps that a university could take around building that business case, that value proposition for accessibility?
Absolutely. One of the recurring themes that we saw in the reviews was an increased attention for universities, the IT organization in the university, to have a commitment for things like information security and policy in their work to secure funding for grant monies. They're allocating funding and putting together continual improvement programs for the technology infrastructure to prove that they would be good stewards of those grant monies. So it's really imperative to include web accessibility into that as a consideration for the continual improvement in that technology stack. We mentioned the legal risk. There's an obvious impetus there for compliance of federal law. It's required to receive federal funding, and it could be that stick really from the Department of Education that could be used to make sure that you're doing that. But if you're looking at a purely business case and a quick win there, there's an ROI for having an accessible IT infrastructure that would make you a differentiator in that evaluation process to prove your worthiness to get that money as an institution.
Absolutely, and I think in some of the conversations we've had, either the schools or the units or departments of the university or the university all up, some of them have really made that connection to being competitive in going for external funding and in being more accessible and inclusive. And I think a lot of the universities have talked about, and we've certainly shared with universities, other competitive advantages from being accessible and inclusive. I know in some of the work that we've done with universities, there's often a department that may be a little bit further ahead in thinking about the value proposition of accessibility. And with several of the universities we've worked with, I've noticed that the College of Business, for example, sometimes seems like it's kind of on the leading edge of accessibility at the university for a variety of reasons. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned from them, that they've already been thinking about how accessibility gives them a competitive advantage in recruiting students and recruiting faculty. And that may be because they've been online longer, doing a lot of their programs completely digitally. Could be they have more resources to think about. But it is, I know one of the things that we've suggested to universities is to look at some of these leading departments, often colleges of business, and start replicating and scaling up some of these good practices that really define what the what the value proposition is, the why for accessibility. So Megan, in the work that we've done together with universities, we know that executive sponsors, high-level committees, CIO councils, or IT leaders in different departments at the university, and a public commitment can really be critical to improving accessibility and inclusion at the university all up. And of course, anything involving a university's leadership often can't be done quickly or can be challenging, but are there steps that a university can think about and take to start building that leadership awareness about disability and a commitment to accessibility and inclusion?
Yeah, James, I think this is one of those areas that really cuts across different types of organizations that, as we begin to understand how we create commitment, it really does take leadership buy-in. And so when we think about a university, oftentimes there is a committee who's already been put together that is addressing accessibility and may have leaders or people from across the university. And so making sure that you're really incorporating and bringing the president's office in, or bringing in, the chancellor of diversity and equity. There are different types of roles at different universities, but making sure that I think that particular committee is organized in such a way in which they have the authority to really cut across the university to make the kinds of decisions that are going to empower the entire organization to move forward on accessibility. I think one thing that we've all learned is that universities tend to be siloed organizations. That's not unusual, to be honest. But here, when we think about that leadership commitment and a committee that's been brought together very intentionally to cut across those silos, is oftentimes the piece that really begins to solidify what that strategy is going to look like, right? Because everybody has a different piece of what is important and what different roles and responsibilities they have. And so by really enabling that, I think that's how you kick off that strategy conversation.
Exactly. I think the point that you make, and Damian, I'm going to pivot back to you here on this, about the uniqueness of universities. Damian, you've worked in a university, you've worked in industry on accessibility. I've worked with companies, with cities, with governments, with universities on accessibility. And I think this leadership aspect is in universities and getting their commitment and public commitment to accessibility and support, to me, has seemed more challenging than maybe in some other sectors. I'd love, Damian, to hear a little bit about your perspective on that. I know a lot of times when I'm meeting with a CIO of a city that the connection is immediate. They understand why accessibility matters and there's benefits of it. And I'm wondering, Damian, if you think that getting that higher level senior executive commitment, the provost president level commitment to accessibility and inclusion is a bit more or can be a bit more challenging in the university sector.
I did find it easier in the university sector than the corporate sector, personally.
Well, that's great.
I did find I had a lot more controls available to me in the corporate sector, right? If we're saying that you may not launch with these types of known defects, that's a business control. And if you want to do that, to bypass the control, you'll have to seek an exception. You'll have to make it a record that goes up to said president. The accountability is greater, I think, in the corporate side than it is inside of the university side. Full stop. It's a completely different set of circumstances there.
Sure. Interestingly, in one of the universities that we worked with was the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And in the previous webinar session to this one, we actually talked with Keith Hayes of that university. And we had done an engagement with them and did the assessment and provided a roadmap with recommendations. And one of the, I think, kind of exciting developments related to that and related to leadership that had happened after the engagement was that the university, perhaps like many universities, had a high-level IT governance council that looks at its technology strategies, its procurements of technology, and its deployments of technology, primarily from sort of a security and privacy perspective. But they had, after the engagement on that high-level committee, governance council for technology, they had actually put Keith on there to literally put accessibility at the table on an equal footing with some of these other really important considerations when universities are buying and deploying technology like security. And so that I think Keith saw, and we certainly thought was a great real win of elevating and showcasing the importance of accessibility within that leadership. Damian, when we were sort of preparing for this, I think you had raised, and maybe in some of our work with universities together, some additional kind of quick wins. One in particular that I thought was interesting, this idea of a presidential or provost access and inclusion award. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
You know, the term heroic effort kept coming up in our sessions with groups, and they were saying, you know, this group is just really excelling and they're going so much further than they had to. You know, this individual contributor was just really knocking out of the park, and you know, if we can get more people to be like them, then we'd be doing really well. I thought it might be a smart idea just to incentivize, first of all, to recognize those people, those heroic effort type people, and say, what you did added a lot of value to the institution. Here's some, you know, performance award with a monetary tie-in there, and then, you know, to give other people that incentive to do the same, you know, and if that's a presidential or provost reward for access and inclusion, I think that's a smart idea just for the incentivized performance.
Yeah, I really love that idea. I think from our G3ICT experience with universities and really with other organizations as well, we absolutely see these pockets of heroic effort. In a minute, we'll be talking about procurement and quick wins there, but I know at Georgia Tech, for example, there were heroic efforts by some individuals really to increase that university's focus on ensuring that accessibility is not part of procurement. And so recognizing that and how they evangelize to other departments, I think is a great idea. And, Megan, before we sort of head into culture questions and issues, anything else you want to add when we're talking about the strategic intent, leadership, and sort of the business case for accessibility?
You know, James, I know you and I were talking that this isn't necessarily a quick win, but I do think it's incredibly important that a university defines an accessibility policy and that they're very open about that. You know, oftentimes we recognize that website accessibility is part of what a university sometimes struggles to do, but also something that's incredibly important. And so when you do define that policy, post it on the website. Make sure that there is an email or some way in which somebody can get in contact with you if they do run into any kind of accessibility issue. So again, maybe it's not the fastest win, but I absolutely believe that that is pinnacle to a university succeeding when it comes to accessibility.
Yeah, I know in a lot of our conversations with universities, and Damian, maybe your lived experience at a university, having that public statement is fantastic, but we've also had conversations about what do you do when information starts coming in as a result of that public statement about a commitment to accessibility. How's that information shared and tracked? And maybe we'll get into a little bit of some discussion about how you react to and respond to that public commitment of to accessibility. So one of the sort of categories of things that we look at in this maturity model and in our work with universities is around culture. And in our maturity model tool, we've built several variables and core capabilities that are focused on really key aspects of university culture that can ideally support increasing accessibility and inclusion. So things like culture of innovation, culture of community engagement, culture of transparency, making information known and available in accessible formats about accessibility at the university, and culture of diversity. So Megan, I know that last one, culture of diversity, is a real passion of yours. In fact, we added that category of variables into the model after having done some pilots with you after your suggestion. So maybe let's start there and think about culture of diversity. A key to increasing commitment to and capability on accessibility is a university's culture of diversity. And by that, we mean hiring people with disabilities and training staff broadly on accessibility and disability awareness. So with that in mind, can you maybe talk about some quick wins related to growing a culture of diversity and even draw on your experience with universities, but also at Microsoft?
Yeah, you know, to me, this is sort of twofold, which is oftentimes within diversity and inclusion, which so many universities are paying attention to, disability gets lost. So don't forget to include disability in the D&I efforts that you are engaging in within the university. And certainly, if you want to create a university in which students are having best in class experiences, students with disabilities, you need to have people with disabilities on staff. And so being really thoughtful about bringing people with disabilities into the community, I think, is critical. Here at Microsoft, we have a dedicated inclusive hiring team where we are actively looking for disability talent to bring into our company. And then once they're here, thinking about the culture in which they are going to thrive. And I think that's the other piece, James, that you mentioned. At Microsoft, we have every single person at the company has required training specifically on accessibility and diversity or disability inclusion. That's really important to think about. What are those moments where you're communicating out to the entire staff? How do you embed accessibility and disability into the training that you may be providing, the mandatory training that you may be providing for people? The last thing that I want to say on this topic is that most universities and really every organization already has people with disabilities. They just haven't raised their hand to say something. And so it is building a culture of trust. It's building a culture in which disability is seen as a strength, in which you're going to begin to see faculty, staff, professors, and even more students coming forward and saying, yes, I have a disability. I'm proud of that disability. And I am working and living in a culture in which that is supported.
Yeah, I think that last piece, and Damian, before I get into some of these issues around culture of diversity and training.
No, but I don't have anything new at my desk. I haven't brought anything new in here, so I don't know.
Sam, I think can you please mute yourself?
Hot mic.
Yeah.
That's a nice way of saying that, Damon. I like that. Hot mic.
That's not his voice.
Just like being puppeteered.
Okay, so one of the things that we heard about the sort of echoing your point, Megan, of raising the voice of faculty, staff, students with disabilities, and one of the things I think that we noticed in some of the work with universities is the maybe to date underutilization of students with disability groups, and even employee resource groups, employees with disabilities, and really tapping into those. And I know, Damian, you've talked a lot about, again, before we get into the training piece, but bringing in community organizations as well, disability organizations in the community to help up-level awareness of disability in the university environment, and even create pipelines of potential employees.
Yeah, we did at Princeton, we had a really, I would say, pretty famously successful partnership with the New Jersey Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. They came in to help me with my training, which made my training infinitely better because they were there with me, delivering expertise that I couldn't. And my post-event evaluation surveys were always like glowing about the commission. And they're like, yeah, Damian was there. The commission, those guys were so awesome. And there was reciprocity there too, because I was getting a lot from my attendees. They were getting something out of it too, going to a school professional group and speaking to them, a staff of IT professionals. So they're raising their bar too. And then we did a reverse job fair. Our HR team, having gone to one of my sessions, said, what if we had the commission in to do a reverse job fair? And I think that's talk about quick wins. That's wonderful. And it really did advance the culture there too.
Yeah, and it's been great to hear you talk about those kinds of steps that are relatively easy to do, that universities in most communities can do, that really have a big impact in both directions, which is a great point. So Damian, maybe building off of that and continuing to think about this culture of diversity as a driver for accessibility and inclusion in universities. Training is a big piece of it. Hiring employees with disabilities is a big piece of culture of diversity, but also training more broadly around of staff at the university on accessibility, on disability awareness. Can you talk a little bit about the role of training in creating this culture of diversity?
Yeah, a lot of the reviews that we were looking at, I saw when we got to the training part, they would, the universities would bring up a page and say, like, these are the available, this is what we tell people they can use for training. And, just like a list of links in a lot of instances. So I wasn't seeing a lot of curation there. I wasn't seeing a lot of role-based training, certainly not to what Megan was talking about, like a required training, like on a level of like, you walk in the door of a new company, you do the harassment training, you do the information security training, you do the disability and inclusion training. That'd be, wonderful if that were there. If they were to at least start by having the quick win here of role-based training programs, so people who produce documents would do something like the WebAIM document accessibility course. People who are responsible for releasing new websites could do things like a DHS trusted tester program, a DQ program. And for the broad audience, I used at Princeton the IAAP's body of knowledge for CPAC, for WAS. They didn't have ADS at the time when I was at Princeton, but I would have included that today because that's the latest micro cert. And then thinking about like badging too. If you're talking about upskilling, that's like a kind of a big buzzword today. People are looking to transform businesses and upskill employees. Making sure badging is there. You get the kind of brass ring people, the competitive people who like to get. If you have a curriculum, if you're giving me these hours of your time, I'd like to give you something in return. So I think that's a good quick win as well.
Sure, and I think we see, and Megan, maybe you could talk about this, the badging piece. We certainly see with accessibility and badging that I think increasingly in companies, an approach to really driving more training and awareness on disability and accessibility.
Yeah, Damian, I couldn't agree with you more. Badging has become a way of not only a reward, but really showing your commitment and what you're doing. And so I will just say one of the things that we've done at Microsoft is to say everything that we do internally from a training perspective, we pretty much turn it all external. So we have the Accessibility Fundamentals badge, which any university could incorporate into their training program. So don't reinvent the wheel. Don't think that you need to go out and hire potentially a team of people to put together training, although I encourage everybody to do what's right for them. But we'll make sure that we do get that link because it might be as simple as you said, using IAAP, using Microsoft, finding the resources out there that really work to bring in.
And related to this training, just quickly, a couple things that I know we've heard at universities that we've worked with, some with you too, some not. Some universities that are actually setting explicit goals for staff to get IAAP accessibility certifications. And even beyond that, providing supports in a couple ways for them successfully getting that certification. So study groups, for example, of cohorts of staff working to get a certification, and even financial support for the staff to get certifications around accessibility, which is great. And then we did some work using the maturity model tool with Georgia Tech not that long ago. And one of the things that they do, I think, really well around training on accessibility and disability awareness is that there's already it's a big university, as are many, and there's already some sort of key professional groups among staff. So there's a Drupal users group across departments at the university that meets on a regular basis and has lots of communications. There's a group of communications professionals, again, that meets on communications issues from department to department. There's a group of procurement people that in different departments that meet regularly. And what they've started doing at Georgia Tech is driving some accessibility content that's appropriate for those roles and for those groups into each of these channels, whether it's Drupal users, communications, or procurement. And that's had, I think, a really positive impact in driving a deeper culture of diversity in awareness there at the university. Okay, so within the university, we've talked about the fact that they're structured somewhat uniquely relative to other sectors, and processes and systems become really important. And a key part of what we look at in the maturity model tool that we have, the assessment tool, is this set of governance and systems, processes, variables. So Keith, a part of that is how the university is structured, which you started talking about. The organizational structure can really help define the university's approach to accessibility and digital inclusion. And so with that in mind and how important that organizational structure is, what are some organizational type steps that a university can take as a quick win? Maybe even leveraging existing organizational structures to drive better capability on accessibility.
Who was that for?
Oh,
David?
sorry, that was Damian, sorry.
I thought that was going to Megan. We're talking about governance and process, right?
Yes, organization, yeah.
So looking back to my time at Princeton, one of the things that I found for in governance and process that was really useful was being involved on their architecture review board. I know that that may go by different names in different schools and even institutions, you know, outside of higher education. But it was nice to have web accessibility with representation at the table with anything that was entering our technology stack. So it was kind of related to vendor governance and onboarding a vendor with an intake questionnaire. But it was also at the point of how is that going to enter our technology stack? How, you know, information security was there, privacy that was there. I mean, everyone from networking, the cloud infrastructure. There's a big round or oval table, and I had a seat there. It was great because I got to ask questions, in evaluate things that were have high impact with the same rigor as there's other controls, and sometimes the same consequence, right? Like my recommendation is to not move forward with this integration into the stack. You know, and I think a quick win there would be a scoring rubric where those new technologies could be evaluated to get like the overall impact, and then those commensurate approaches that would be on the other side of that. So if you have like a new electron microscope that has an interface with 5 people that use it, that's something. If you have a piece of technology where you can't graduate unless you submit a document to the system, that's a tremendous impact. And in that, you know, the approach there would be, you know, mandatory VPAT. I'm going to trust your work, but I'm going to verify it to say I'm going to run my own testing. I love that you have your VPAT at the ready. That's wonderful, but we can't take the risk to say our students can graduate because of your faulty technology. So the trust but verify kind of as an approach, you know, and working with groups to build roadmaps and their plan for performance.
Sure. So having a seat at the table like this architecture review board really allowed you to bring in that perspective in those tools and help, I guess, ideally set up those systems. Interestingly, one of the earlier discussions we had, and both of you were involved in this engagement with the University of Massachusetts, we were doing a previous webinar with the CIO of the University of Massachusetts. And at the time that we did our work with the university together, UMass didn't really have a named manager or a unit that focused on digital accessibility. But I think a great development as a result of the engagement and of your great insights and recommendations, the CIO has created a role after our work with them that focuses specifically on digital accessibility. And really importantly, I think within that organizational structure that we're talking about, has defined important points where other parts of the university, other key departments, whether it's instructional learning or disability services or the academic departments, where they need to interface with this new point person on digital accessibility within the IT infrastructure at the university. So it sounds like that work that's really working out really quite well from an organizational perspective. So Megan, Damian talked about the importance of elevating accessibility to the level of privacy and security when it comes to these IT review boards. Another key piece of that, which he also started talking about with VPATs is procurement. And as we think about universities with growing capability and commitment to accessibility, we certainly look at procurement as part of that. Can you talk a little bit about quick wins in that area of how universities are buying technology assets?
You know, I jokingly say that procurement is, not jokingly, procurement is one of my favorite topics. And James, you know this about me, because I think that if all of us as a community, and I don't mean just universities, I mean every single organization, if we said we would only buy technology that was accessible, we would change the world overnight. And so I love what Damon said, which is trust but verify. Many people come to the table with a VPAT, right? but it's really the process behind the VPAT. How did you come to the conclusion that something either, is conformant to, the global accessibility standard, or is not? And so those are some of the questions, again, that as a university I would be asking, which is what's the process by which you create these conformance statements, right? Because I think that will tell you a lot about, again, how trustworthy that documentation may be, because these are voluntary. We have to remember that the individual that is creating these really is doing so on their own terms with their own process. And I think the other piece that's really critical, again, kind of coming back to that moment that we talked about earlier, which is, when you do have an accessibility statement or a policy, what happens when you get information back? The same is true for your vendor. Hey, if I find a bug or I find something's not accessible, what's the pathway by which I can communicate with you, and you will therefore go forward and begin to solve that problem? So here at Microsoft, we have the Enterprise Disability Answer Desk, which is available for every university. And I want to make that clear that if any university ever has a question about Microsoft accessibility, we have a team of experts that will help identify, either the solution. And hey, bugs happen. We do get bugs. And so we have a direct line into engineering to make sure that we can get that on the roadmap and we can get that fixed. So again, asking those questions: how's the VPAT developed? Who am I going to contact? What's the process by which something will get fixed if we do find issues? It's just really, really important.
Yeah, Megan, you really touch on a few things, and I'll start by saying, like you, I'm a huge fan of procurement as kind of the low-hanging fruit of increasing accessibility, and we certainly at G3 ICT work on that around the world. And I'll tell you, one of the and we work on procurement in all sectors, so it could be in courts and justice systems, schools, cities, national governments. And one of the best examples that I've seen of an organization in their approach to procurement and making sure that they are only buying and deploying accessible technology is actually at a university, at Georgia Tech University, where we did some work. And they have put in place the kinds of systems and processes that really define a more mature approach to whatever the variable is, in this case, procurement, where they have metrics in their tracking procurements across the university, so that they're confident that, I think the number was 80% of their procurements across the university, they know are referencing ICT accessibility standards, global standards. They are engaging their technology vendors and getting VPATs. They're reviewing the VPATs, and they're tracking it, which is another important piece, I think, of a more mature kind of approach to these things. And so they know how many of their tenders, of their RFPs, of their purchases are requiring accessibility, and they know where it's not happening and why, and they're working on fixing that. And they're also, as I mentioned earlier, training their procurement officials on accessibility standards and VPATs. So getting to your point, I'll also mention that you sort of touch on, Megan, as part of this, I think an important piece, and would love to hear either or both of you weigh in on this. A part of the maturity model that we're not talking explicitly about today is partnerships, including partnerships with your technology vendors, and having that kind of relationship of a sort of shared commitment to increasing accessibility of the kinds of technology that the university is buying from their technology vendors. And we have a tool at G3 ICT. It's actually a discussion guide of these are the kinds of questions you should be asking your technology vendor about accessibility, and this is what you should be hoping to hear in the response. So I don't know, Megan, if you or Damian as well want to talk at all about this notion of partnership, particularly with technology vendors.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely great. Well, so two things. One, which the concept of making sure people understand what it means to get an accessible product is really important. I know at Microsoft, that's something that we're working on as well, which is, okay, yeah, the language is in the procurement, but how do I know if I've actually gotten an accessible product or service or not? So I think that's also really critical. But a good vendor should be a partner. It should be a relationship in which you're driving forward societal inclusion and really thinking about addressing the disability divide. And so, I know that's really important for us because we learn so much. We're only as good as the feedback we get from our own users, and universities are critical for us to really think about what is our path forward to improve, our own accessibility inclusion. And so, the hope and the goal would be that it truly is through partnership that we're going to create universities that actually are serving the needs of students with disabilities, faculty, and staff.
I think it's exciting when we see these kinds of partnerships. And I should say at this point, perhaps, that for some of these engagements, some of these assessments that we've done at G3ICT with universities, that's actually been a result of the partnership between Microsoft and their university customer partner, and sort of bringing us into to work with them to understand where they stand today.
Yeah, maybe like a very logistical quick win in your intake process would be asking the vendor if the accessibility features have to be like turned on, especially at the user account level. I've had that, or if it's what a certain version has the accessibility features and we don't have, what version are we buying that has that feature? I've seen both of those have consequence to say, no, all these, your testing was incorrect because you didn't have the accessibility feature turned on for the user when you were doing the test. Like, there's a button for accessibility to turn on for the user, and we didn't run the test correctly. So be careful. Maybe even put that into your questionnaire, your intake questionnaire. Like, does the user have to activate it?
Well, I think though that's really a question about deployment. And so, I will be very candid with you in that oftentimes, let's say somebody's using Microsoft Teams and they say, well, we don't have captions. And I said, well, your IT didn't actually enable captions. So it goes both ways, right? Where we by default might be turning it on as a technology vendor, and then the IT department is deciding to turn it off. So that is such a great point though, which is, what does that deployment strategy look like in order to make sure that the accessibility is readily available?
One of the quick wins that I know we've put into several of the roadmaps that we've done with universities is exactly that, David, Megan. Make sure you understand what accessibility functionality you have built in, what you already purchased, and that it's turned on and being used, and people know that it's there. And that also is a good result of a partnership with your technology vendors, so that you're clear, as Damian was saying, that you know what's there and how to turn it on and how to know if it's turned on.
That's a great point. Great point.
So we're sort of moving into the meat of these engagements and the core of thinking about a smart university, which is a university that's using technology, deploying technology assets more and more. And we've got a set of sort of variables that we look at with universities on that. So it's, how does the university know if its technology deployments are accessible? What does it do when they're not accessible? What kinds of systems are in place? And also things like, is the university using technology and data to solve long-standing kind of inclusion challenges at the university? Again, whether it's faculty, staff, or students. So technology really being the backbone of smart universities. So with that in mind, and as we're moving into the more on the technology, and we already are, David, what can a university do when it comes to knowing the accessibility of its systems and deployments? Universities have lots of platforms they use enterprise-wide, but also in departments. So how can they be better, and are there quick wins to be better at knowing the accessibility of its deployments and then remediating accessibility issues?
I guess two stories I have from Princeton and the area would be the way that we attacked, I guess, looking at our building an inventory, right, and looking at things, giving the evaluation. So basically in that scoring rubric, again, the idea of what do we need to look at first, and which would have the highest impact. Building testing strategies that make sense from manual testing, automated testing. Obviously, finding any kind of automation in the pipeline as well is a smart idea. We also try to think about the service aspect of inside the technology organization, right? And thinking about, and I didn't coin this term, accessibility as a service. That's I think for the first time I ever heard it was Carl Groves. So I'm going to give him credit for that term. Don't think, oh, Damian said accessibility as a service. But where the different activities of the work are really tracked in an ITSM format. So, the CIO of Princeton in a group meeting to the IT organization said that we were like a Ferrari with the window painted black. We had this really powerful machine that could go really fast forward, but we can't see what's in front of us because we didn't have the information to understand what we were doing well or poorly. So there was a massive effort to really put everything into the ServiceNow that we were using, but that could be any kind of program that would do the same function to really understand, to measure, to improve something, it must be measured, and vice versa. If you're not measuring it, I wouldn't expect to improve it.
Right. I know you've in a lot of the assistance that you've given universities, you've talked about applying these systems and processes that universities use for other aspects of their IT deployments, whether it's privacy or security, and using that same rigor with accessibility, which is fantastic. Another, as we're talking about technology deployments, another thing I know that I've heard you talk about, and maybe you can mention a little bit here as well from your experience at Princeton, I believe, is the Key Sites initiative there.
Sure, that's the idea of building that inventory where we're looking at things that we were seeing going wrong for other schools, really, just to say like what were those kind of key aspects of the experience from the student perspective, from our homepage to our admissions page to the student life page, like what would they be using to evaluate the school, kind of their journey, right? So if as an applicant to a student to being prepared to graduate, like what are those things that they really needed the most, besides their just the academic pages and things of that nature. I mean, we did call that the Key Sites initiative, so we gave it like a branding internally, so it had had funding, it had the kind of brands that you can kind of walk it around and shop it around to the different groups of stakeholders, and it built a name internally to say, "Oh, do you have a site in the Key Sites initiative?" And it became like an entity of its own. It kind of had its life of its own, and we use the same kind of scoring factors to evaluate those sites. I mean, we also looked, to look at the reverse engineer what happened in OCR cases too, to say what did those agreements ask the schools to do? Why don't we just start doing it so we don't have to be told to do it? Kind of volunteering rather than being voluntold to do the work. And we use those factors as the building blocks of how we chose. You have thousands of sites. Which ones are you going to do first? Which ones are going to have the most impact to your audiences? And prioritizing and triaging, it was a useful exercise.
Yeah, and again, some of that not necessarily all that difficult to do. It's just having the commitment to make sure that you're applying this rigor, these systems to accessibility, which is fantastic. Megan, another aspect that we mentioned about these more mature universities when it comes to accessibility and inclusion is that they are actually using technology to solve longstanding inclusion challenges. What can universities learn from companies like Microsoft? And universities are themselves, many of them, real innovation hubs. But what can they learn? What are some quick wins perhaps around innovation and technology at universities?
So there's actually 3 points that I want to bring up here. And one of them comes from the University of Illinois and some work that we did there around what does a really inclusive classroom look like? And what we begin to understand is that having lectures recorded that have captions and searchable transcripts, the University of Florida at St. Petersburg has shown that it improves grades by 8%. And so we worked with Dr. Agnew, who teaches computer science. And so every single first-year computer science student had, their courses with captions and searchable transcripts. And that had a really positive impact on student outcomes. Not only students with disabilities, but students who English might not be their first language, as well as just a great way of studying. So think about the way in which you are deploying technology every day in the classroom. Turn captions on, record lectures. And I think we're seeing this a lot more now throughout the year of the pandemic, in which we are relying on things like Microsoft Teams that have these capabilities, as well as Microsoft Stream, where you can search the transcripts, right? So that's kind of one of my big, give me 2 thumbs up. So I think I've said something right. Do you want to weigh in, Damon?
I love Microsoft Stream. Talking about when companies turn things on and off. When they turn that on for me, I was like, this is it. This has everything up. It has the video, searchable transcript. I could interrupt it to put a form in there to do like a quick assessment. I couldn't say enough. That's the best thing I've seen so far out of Microsoft. I love it.
That's so fun. This is my favorite tool too. So, okay, so now I have procurement and Stream. It's like, I don't know, they need some sort of, yeah. So, I mean, really, honestly, I think evaluating how do you, literally use the tools that you have to really, drive technology and innovation in the way that you teach. The second piece that I would mention is accessibility part of your computer science and engineering curriculum? This, I will say, is something that most technology companies are looking for. And so a group called Teach Access, which is a partnership between technology and universities, are saying, how do we begin to influence these programs so that, new hires coming into our companies actually have some background in accessibility? I'm going to pick on in a positive way the University of Illinois again, because they have a certificate program, which is available for anybody that looks at accessible design and policy. And so I think, they are using that as a way. Most of their computer science students are taking that certificate program. But again, it's about infusing accessibility really into the knowledge of what a student is going to walk away with after being at your university. And then my third point here is just around student projects. It has been super fun. We've worked with Olin College the last couple of years to do accessibility student projects where the students are interacting with the local community, the local disability community, to learn what are unmet needs, where are there places where innovation could be happening if we apply some new thinking and some new creativity. And so I think that I love that combination and the connection of saying, how do we take vendors, tech companies, invest in student projects, and then bring the disability community into that process to really drive forward what we, to sort of push the boundaries of what's possible. So student projects and hackathons are a great way to drive just new thinking and energy into accessibility at any university.
The leveraging existing communities at the university, whether it's employees or, as you've been talking about in a really compelling way, I think, Megan, students, is something that I think some really innovative universities are taking some great steps. I know with one of the universities we've worked with, that they're creating a student-centered accessibility testing program, which sort of gets to some of what you were talking about, Damian, with the deployments, and making sure that those deployments, you as well, Megan, making sure that those technology deployments are user tested and accessible. And then the students then are also learning as part of that testing program. So really good sort of bi-directional benefit there. And Megan, I also applaud the University of Illinois and some of the great innovations that they've done around accessibility tools that they've created for in partnership sometimes with Microsoft, as you mentioned, and others, but real accessibility tools that are available broadly to universities and others, like Class Transcribe and the AI Inspector. And so leveraging that great innovation ecosystem to benefit accessibility is fantastic. So the last piece I want to touch on here in the remaining minutes is around data, which is another area that we typically dig into a bit with universities. And if technology is the backbone of a smart university, then data is the lifeblood of a smart university. So Damian, maybe starting with you, how can a university use data more effectively to support improving accessibility and inclusion at the university?
I think you could start off, make sure I'm on mute. Okay, so you could start off by trying to break down those silos where the data exists. At Princeton, they had, before I left, they were doing this basically like a commission of doing just that, of getting these people who own data into the same room just to talk to each other about how they could start sharing it through APIs and things of that nature. So you've got information inside of like PeopleSoft, for example, or some kind of HR and system like that. You've got academic records. You've got the Office of Disability. Almost every school is going to have an Office of Disability Services where they're tracking a lot of data about what kind of accommodations they're using, where can the opportunities be to kind of maybe pre-populate some experiences for students, right? Like if there's an accessibility feature to turn on, they've already registered at the disability office, maybe that gets turned on right then and there, that there's something there. So first, breaking down those silos, and then thinking about ways to measure and improve performance in hiring. We talked about already, Megan's talked about hiring people with disabilities and having goals, metrics and goals where you're saying, we need to hire X% of people in these categories of inclusion and diversity. I see it a lot in other categories of inclusion and diversity, but I'm not seeing it anywhere in other industries or within higher education and other groups that we talk to. So setting legitimate hiring goals, and also tracking things of nature about, like, just quality of life, key performance indicators. Obviously, one of the things I heard during our time together that was impactful for me was the dropout rate for students with disabilities was so much higher than students without disabilities. I mean, there's a goal you could set, define the metric, measure it, find a way to measure against it, and then track your performance and hold yourself accountable for for good and bad. When things go well or when things are not, you're not meeting your goals. Have a consequence there.
Damian, I like how a couple of times when we've been talking about quick wins in different areas, you've gone back to look at your good practices and how you manage technology in other areas and apply them here, including ITSM systems and goals and metrics and governance councils or boards. That's all helpful in this space as well. And I think in the data space, it is. One of the things that I know we've heard in some of the universities that the three of us have worked with together has been, as Damian, as you're saying, there's actually some pockets of interesting, useful data relative to the experience of faculty, staff, and students with disabilities at the university, but it's just not being shared because of these silos, as you mentioned, Damian. But it is there in some of the work that we've done with universities. It's in some of the places you would expect it to be, certainly around graduation rates, but disability services typically will have useful data to, again, get that picture of the experience of people with disabilities on campus. But even in facilities management, with one of the universities we worked with, they had incredibly rich data about the experience of people with disabilities on campus that wasn't necessarily being shared into the broader D&I picture of how is this group experiencing life at the university. So I always trying to bridge those silos is important. So Megan, in the last couple of minutes, anything that you'd like to sort of add to build on that and thinking about data at a university to promote greater inclusion and accessibility?
Well, I would say that one of the greatest challenges that we have in society today is the disability data desert. We just literally don't know enough about people with disabilities to drive great innovation, especially when we start to think about AI. And so, one of the pieces is, again, around partnership. Like, how do we come together? I'm going to specifically call out our AI for Accessibility program, which is a $25 million grant program. We're actively looking for university partnerships where we can begin to understand, what does the disability data divide look like? How do we ethically collect data? How do we ethically share that data in a way that's going to really help us make sure that the next generation of technology is accessible? So I would say that this isn't just a university issue. It's about how can we use the talent and the research capacity within the university to take on this larger societal issue.
And really, universities being as creative with data and information as they are with technology, perhaps, in terms of improving outcomes for people with disabilities, faculty, staff, and student at the university. Absolutely, I think that's a fantastic point and opportunity, really. And I know some of the universities that we work with look to that program at Microsoft as an opportunity to advance thinking and activity. So that's great. So with that, and on that note, I think we'll draw it to a close. Damian and Megan, just any last thoughts that you want to share before we close out? Damian?
I do want to give another credit. The Trust But Verify came from my work as a recipient of the questionnaire from Microsoft that they're going to trust but verify me. So I did not come up with that term either. And I, just to like you're saying too, Megan, like, if we all started like to take our own medicine, I've both issued questionnaires like that and I've received them as well. And it does make a big change. It's something I can go shop around very easily to people when I get that. Say, look, Microsoft is demanding, we have to do it. And it's a lot easier to get the ball rolling. So if every school did it as well, it just will change the world. So I fully agreed, but I also wanted to give the credit where it was due.
Oh, well, that, for me, this is about culture. Part of the way that we are, creating great accessibility products is because we've got people with disabilities embedded on our teams. And so I extend that to the university, which is, how are you building a culture of inclusion and creating an environment in which disabilities are celebrated as a strength?
Fantastic. That's a great way to end. And thank you for attending and listening. Thank you to both of you for helping us out. This is the last in the series of this higher education webinar series at IAAP. Thank you. And we hope you've gotten some quick wins that you can bring back to your university. Thank you.
Thank you both. That was awesome. Megan, real quickly, this is Christopher. Would you mind if we took this and put it into a podcast? Is there any issues or something that may need to be signed off?
Yeah.
Okay. Thumbs up?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, good. Well, I'll send you the link when we do that. It probably would be this summer before we get it out of the queue.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Megan. I think Damian may. Damian. Okay.
All right. Thanks, James.
All right. Thanks, Megan. We'll talk to you later.
Bye, y'all.